I'm Dr. Sham Rane, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Compressor Technology at City St. George's, University of London. I'll be covering a set of lectures that talk about computational fluid dynamics in twin screw compressors, and today's session is on deforming rotor grid. Before we talk about grid generation, let's look at what is the essence of computational fluid dynamics in twin screw compressors. Twin screw compressors are a type of positive displacement machines. They consist of a main rotor and a gate rotor, and both rotors are arranged in a housing. Between the rotors and the housing, compression chambers are formed, and by reduction in volume, the pressure and temperature of the gas rises. The interest of a CFD model is in predicting parameters such as pressure field, temperature field, velocity, magnitude and distribution, mass flow rates to the machine at various operating conditions, capturing leakage and estimating the efficiency. Also the power consumed during compression and other dynamic losses, which also can suggest design improvements. Here you can see two animations. They are synchronized with respect to movement of the rotors. On the first animation, the surface of the rotor is colored using the pressure contour or pressure field. The blue color is low pressure and the high pressure is the discharge indicated by red color. As you can see, when the rotors rotate, the compression chamber is translated forward and there is reduction in volume, which raises the pressure. At the same time, velocity vectors are plotted in the discharge pipe and the domain. And what can be observed is that there is fluctuation in the field as the compression cycle repeats. On the other hand, the second animation shows a plot of temperature also on the surface of the rotors and in the plane on which the velocity vectors have been shown. It can be seen that unlike pressure, the gas temperature leaks from the high pressure chamber into the low pressure chamber, and hence its diffusion into the upstream or downstream chambers can be visible. Grid generation techniques can be broadly classified into structured and unstructured grids, or meshes commonly called. And most of the commercially available CFD solvers, which are based on finite volume method, work with an unstructured mesh or unstructured grid. Depending on the dimensions, they can be further classified into quadrilateral or hexahedral in 2 dimensions, or triangular and tetrahedral in 3-dimensional. And also in 3-dimensional, there are polyhedral structures. These are further classified based on the method of implementing these grids. On the other hand, in structured grids, there is a similar classification into 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. However, I would like to highlight the first branch here, which is denoted as mapped structural mesh, in which there are methods such as transfinite interpolation, abbreviated as TFI, and there are differential methods which fall into the category of elliptic and hyperbolic. When it comes to the deforming rotor grid generation, although the CFD solver works with an unstructured mesh, the method of implementing this grid is based on a structural architecture and specifically into the mapped category. For a CFD model, the compression chamber is an enclosed volume along with the leakage gaps, which you can see here between the rotors and the housing. The computational grid generation directly impacts accuracy of the rotor profiles, leakage gap sizes, accuracy of the leakage flow through these gaps, grid count, as well as quality. Grid generation also controls the cell structure in the cross section and also in the 3 dimensions. There are 2 main approaches to differential rotor grid generation. First is an algebraic approach and second is a differential approach, which I will talk about in the next few slides. Also, the mesh structure or topology can be classified into rotor to casing type of structure or casing to rotor type of structure, in which both the rotors can have independent domains, which is called as 2-domain method, or they can be generated as a single domain mesh. What you see here in this snapshot is a representation of the cusp line. There is a top cusp and a bottom cusp. And between this cusp line and the rotors, a small region is formed called as the blowhole leakage area, which is highlighted here. This leakage area is directly captured by the rotor grid. Similarly, there are sealing lines. One sealing line is between the two rotors called as interloop sealing line, and other sealing lines are between the rotors and the housing called as tip sealing lines, and they can be at the high pressure and the low pressure, or leading edge and trailing edge of the compression chamber. These sealing lines and associated gaps and gap flows are also directly captured by the deforming rotor grid. In addition to these regions, there is also high pressure axial leakage through the faces and low pressure axial leakage. The grid generator scourge uses initially an algebraic approach and then improves the mesh quality by applying a differential smoothing. The main steps that are involved in this process consist of getting the boundary in terms of the profile. These profiles are then split into two O grid domains, and the method of that is used here is to calculate first a rack line, which is indicated as the partitioning line here. Once the two domains are available, the boundaries are first mapped. At this stage, the topology can be distinguished as rotor to casing or casing to rotor. Once that is regularized, you can generate the 2D mesh and then assemble it together to form the 3D mesh. The main advantages of an algebraic approach is that it is very quick, because the rack calculation is required to be done only once when the profile is imported. And then using transfinite interpolation, you can generate a set of meshes representing the 2D domain, as you can see in this animation. The cell quality of the 2D mesh is then improved using a differential algorithm, and then it is assembled together to form the 3D mesh as seen here. The 3D mesh is purely hexahedral and consists of either two domains or single domain based on the used method. Here you can see an example of an oil-injected twin screw compressor. And during the simulation, the distribution of the oil, its impact on heat transfer to cool down the gas, and all physics of the leakage has been directly captured through the deforming rotor grid generation. On the other hand, a differential approach for deforming grid generation relies on the solution of a partial differential equation, such as the Laplace equation shown here. In this method, again, the rotor domain is cut into number of slices, and each slice will consist of boundaries represented by the main rotor profile, the gate rotor profile, and the housing. Now, the principle of this method is such that depending on the boundary condition applied on the profiles, for example, let's say the variable phi is equal to +1 on this boundary, -1 on this boundary, and 0 on the housing, then the solution of the Laplace equation or the partial differential equation will result into a set of isolines. The property of these isolines is that they don't intersect each other, and because of that, they are also very smooth in its flow. Similarly, the boundary conditions can then be flipped and isolines can be obtained in the orthogonal direction. And a superimposition of these orthogonal lines is basically a representative of the two-dimensional grid as shown here. In place of the rack curve, which was used in the algebraic method, an ISO value of 0 here in this particular boundary condition setup is shown in this animation. And it can be seen that this particular isoline partitions the domain neatly into O-grid structures. I would like to summarize by saying that the methods of deforming rotor grid generation are still evolving. It is a vast field because there are several options possible, such as variable geometry grids, where the lead, the axis of engagement, the number of rotors, relative motion between them, and also the profile can all be variable. Few examples are shown here, such as dual lead rotors typically used in vacuum pumps, or variable lead and variable profile twin screw rotors, which are still as novel applications. Or you can have multiple gate rotors, such as a tri-rotor arrangement shown here, which is used in refrigeration applications. Thank you. Further details on the methods that we discussed are available in the link presented in the discussion. With that, we conclude today's short lecture, and for any further questions, please get in touch.